as we're going to read today, um, the Judith story is clearly she's Jewish in that story, but the Yael character that we're going to read about today is it's not she's actually not by appearances she isn't Jewish. So we'll take a look at that story. She's not even married to a Jewish guy. So the cool thing is it actually gets back, as we said, to Hanukkah. So we don't, the story of Hanukkah is not in the Hebrew Bible. It's it was too new of a story to be. The story of the Maccabees was too new. It happened as the Bible was being canonized. I wouldn't say it wasn't written before the Bible was canonized, but it was written as the Bible was being canonized, and for various reasons was just way too new of a story to be included in the Bible, not least of which the rabbis, who were the ones who chose what was in the Hebrew canon, what was in our Bible, what was holy, didn't care for the Maccabees, didn't care for the Maccabees that much, to put it mildly. So it was also, they weren't going to get in on that either. So what I will tell you is that the closest thing we have to a biblical story that we traditionally read at Hanukkah is the story of Judith, a Jewish version of the story of Judith. But I'm jumping the gun here. We want to talk about the original inspiration, the original amazing story of Jewish women taking matters into their own hands. Well, there is obviously early biblical stories in Genesis of women taking matters into their own hands, right? Because women do play an important role from the beginning of humanity with Eve. And Rebecca is arguably one of the most important facilitators, and even some would say manipulators of history, by making sure that her son Jacob is eventually given the blessing and the lineage essentially of Abraham. So women are important in the Bible. There's no question about that. The story of Deborah is unique that we're going to take a look at today. It really is. There is no biblical story like it, for many reasons. What was that?
See, and then Deborah, aren't they the oldest?
You're jumping the gun, but yeah, according to most scholars, or not most scholars, but most scholars who study the book, who study Judges, because there's a lot of people who don't study the book of Judges, but for those who are familiar with the book of Judges, this is perhaps the oldest. It's not universally. I want to say there are people who will say that this is not the oldest part of the Bible, but there are people who say it is, and interestingly, even older than the Song of the Sea. Even though chronologically, the Song of the Sea, which is what we sang when we came out of Egypt, as we crossed the Red Sea, is chronologically older. It happened obviously during Moses' time, and this Song of Deborah we're going to read today happens about 100 years later. By studying the language of the text, so by studying the philology and the morphology of the words, the secrets, if you will, that are encoded in the language, there are people who say this is actually the oldest Hebrew that we have in the Song of Deborah. Also, some of the references, or more importantly, what's not referenced in the book of Deborah, seems to also indicate that it might be the oldest text in the Hebrew Bible, meaning that it might go back to 1200, 1100 BCE. All of this is interesting. All of this is, to some extent, a little bit of speculation, but we're going to take a look at the story because it is also unique in the story of in the whole text of Judges that we've been reading the last couple of weeks, because it really not only has a woman as a lead character, but as we see, we actually learn a little bit more about what a judge does, I think, in the story of Deborah. So just forget the gender issues, forget those for a second. If we look at the actual text, it actually tells us a little bit more about what a judge does than the first couple of Judges that we read about. And really, so far, we've really only read in depth about Ehud, who's a prophet, a judge who is also responsible, and we'll talk about the similarities, is responsible for an assassination, which, again, without ruining the story today, we are going to be reading about assassinations. Tyrannicide, as it's sometimes called. What was that?
You said the Song of Deborah is considered one of the oldest. How does it compare to Miriam's song by the sea?
That's what I was just saying. You missed that.
Okay.
I was just saying.
I missed
It's
that part.
older. It is probably older, even though chronologically
Okay.
it takes place later. The Hebrew
Okay.
language tells us that it's probably written at an earlier stage. Both very old, both considered older than the rest of the text around it, but maybe even older than the Song of the Sea. So if that's the case, then it's maybe the oldest text in the entire Bible. There are people who say that when we look at what we will never be able, well, I shouldn't say never. It's not likely that we're going to find a text that's 3,000 years old that we'll be able to say, oh, this is 3,000. I mean, it was amazing to find the Dead Sea Scrolls that are 2,000 years old. If we could find something that was 3,000 years old, which would be almost incomprehensible, not impossible, but almost impossible. If we could find a text from that period, then we could have proof, but not likely. We're not very likely. Like 99%, we'll never know for sure. But that being said, most scholars do like this idea of dating this early, which, again, there's not a coincidence here. Songs or epic poems were probably the oldest texts because those were the ones that survived as kind of holy contained pieces because they were sung. They were sung or they were chanted as poetry. There was a rhythm to them, and so they were preserved in a way that stories usually aren't preserved. I mean, stories, you can change whole stories, but not a poem, not a song, because if you take out the word, then you've changed the meter, you've changed the rhyme, and so it's almost like a way of constructing something that's written or something that's oral, something that we say, but almost constructing it like a painting because it freezes it. It's like if you make a paint, if you paint something, it becomes fixed, right? Or you take a photograph now, it becomes fixed. That's what happens with poetry, is that it fixes it. It doesn't mean that poems don't change. I know they do, but generally speaking, they don't change as much, and they're not, and they actually they retain an integrity that oftentimes it allows for language and archaic language to be preserved in a way that, like, we don't think about it, but you all know it, because when we sing, or when we say Psalm 23, when we say, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, none of us ever use the word yea, ever. And if you're using the word yea, then
use it to vote with.
yes, he maketh me lie down in green path. We don't use the word maketh very
We
often,
don't say that.
but we seem to have no issue reverting back to that within the language of a song or a poem. So and I would venture to say that the same thing will happen with songs, in the sense that there already are terms that are fixed in songs today, or that we've sung, and we're like, well, that's not a word we use anymore. I mean, just you can think of some of the songs or words, if you use the word groovy today,
Right. That's what I was thinking.
Like, when you say I'm feeling groovy, you're like, what? That's definitely the 60s. That's not something we say today. So there are ways
For sure.
There's definitely some words in rap songs that people also look at and go, oh, that's real old school, because you referred to that. But I think, and by the way, it happens with places too, because I was thinking about this recently with regards to rap, is that some of the rap songs that talked about Brooklyn, for example, projects in the 1980s and even early 90s, those areas have been regentrified. So when people talk about some of these places, they're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's a really nice area now. So we even do it with places where we refer to a place in a song, and then that place has a different feeling about it, because it's not that place anymore. And I mean, I guess it's true even for, places like Haight-Ashbury or places that, people would talk about, and the context for that place is it means something completely different today. And people who, in some cases, may eventually forget what the original context. You'll have to explain to people what that place meant at that time when that song was first sung. So we see it even on our own day in a period of 40 or 50 years. You can imagine what happens over the period of 1,000 years. Things can mean something totally different. So definitely see that in the Song of Deborah. The problem is that we don't even understand, in some cases, what the references are, and even some of the places. I will say that there's even some problem identifying some of the places that are mentioned in the song. But first, we're going to look at it because we talked about it. But we're going to look at the Song of Deborah, which actually comes after the story of Deborah. So, like we have in the Exodus story, we talked about the Song of the Sea a little bit. We have, of course, the Exodus, the leaving and crossing the Red Sea. Then we have a song about it in chapter 15. So, chapter 14, we have the incident, and then chapter 15, we have the song. We have that in a lot of places where like the song, almost every place we have a song or a poem in the Bible, a prayer, we have the story before to set it up, to explain the context. And so we have that in the book of Jonah, when we have the prayer of Jonah, which is chapter 2, we have the text there. We have the song of Hannah, the prayer of Hannah in the book of Samuel that we'll read in a few weeks, which is when she was praying for her son Samuel. And then we have the setup and then the explanation for it. And almost every case we have of that, we believe that the song or the poem existed before the narrative, so that the people wrote the narrative to kind of set up and explain the context for the song, which again tells us that the song existed. It existed in some form before the narrative, and that people wanted to kind of explain the narrative, which also again kind of indicates a passage of time. And in some cases, we believe that some of the passages of time are literally hundreds of years between when the song was written or the prayer was written and when the accompanying narrative text was written. And that may be the case in the book of Judges. So there you will, well, I'll point out some differences, inconsistencies or whatever between the song. They're not major, but they're enough to say, well, wow, that was not written at the same time, or there seems to be details that are missing. So let's take a look again. We're reading from chapter 4 today, and we're only going to probably read chapters 4 and 5, but we're going to talk about Judith, not you, Judith. We set it up. We waited for you. We're talking about the other Judith, your namesake Judith, who is known for her sword and her love of cutting off people's heads. And so we're going
Wait
to.
a minute. Didn't she only cut off one?
Maybe, I don't know. But she's known for it. It's what she's known
For it, but it's not like
she's known for cutting off.
It's only the crimes that get caught.
We read the story. We read her story at the time of Hanukkah. So I thought it was a perfect. I had no knowledge that we were going to read this right before Hanukkah. Well, actually, I could have probably figured that out. Anyways, so we're reading. Last week we read about the story of Ehud, who famously slayed Eglon, the king of Moab, while he was in his bathroom, while he was in the toilet. Seems to be the case. And he stabs him, and the guy is very heavy, and the blade actually gets like subsumed by his corpulent belly. And it's a disgusting story because eventually they pull out the knife and all of his bile comes out. So he was trying to go to the bathroom, and essentially, Ehud made him go to the bathroom Caesarean style, if you will. Seriously, I mean, that's like the ultimate joke, if you will, which is not funny, fairly gory, but it is ironic that a person tried to go to the bathroom and ends up getting cut open, and that's where his stuff comes out. And that's what the Bible says. Literally, his dirt came out of his stomach. And so there's peace after that, at least with the Moabites, for 80 years. And then it just says one line, Shamgar, the son of Anat, went to war against the Philistines, and he killed a lot of them with an ox goad. Very similar to what we'll read later, much more detail with Samson. We read about another guy named Shamgar, and don't know much about him. He gets one line, and then we get this, which is chapter 4, and it's the setup of bad things are happening. We cry out. God sends us a judge. Judge delivers us from this evil force. Sometimes they're Canaanites. Oftentimes, as we've seen, they're Moabites or Philistines or other people that are not Canaanites. Today, we're reading about Canaanites. It's actually one of the few scenes where I actually read about Canaanites being the problem. We have peace for a while. We go back to bad behavior, and then the cycle repeats. This is the book of Judges in a nutshell. And this is what we're going to start with, the typical way for a story in Judges to begin. And here it is. Rosemary, if you will.
And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord when Ehud was dead. And the Lord sold them into the hand of Yavin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, the captain of whose host was Sisera, which dwelt in Harosheth Hagoyim.
Yeah, so this is actually a story of Canaanites, Canaanite kings, Canaanite leaders, Canaanites who are the indigenous peoples of the land of Israel, or at least they were there before, while we were not there. They were there while we were in Egypt. And as we see, they are militarily capable of doing things, especially the book of Joshua told us this, that there were places that we did not kick them out. We kicked them out of places like Jericho and Ain and other places across north and south, but we weren't able to completely conquer them. And so what happens is that if we don't conquer them, we have this situation that the Bible says we're going to have, which is they're going to be a pain in the neck. They are going to be a problem. And in this case, this king Yavin and his captain Sisera. So Sisera is his general. It's his main military leader. This is the problem. These are the bad guys in this story. Okay.
And the children of Israel cried to the Lord, for he had 900 chariots of iron, and 20 years he strongly oppressed the children of Israel. And Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, she judged Israel at that time.
Okay, so let's pause right here. Well, actually, let's read one more line and then we'll pause.
And she dwelt under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in Mount Ephraim, and the children of Israel came up to her for judgment.
Okay, so believe it or not, these couple of lines give us a better indication of what Judges did or might have been doing than any other part of the book of Judges, in the sense that usually it just says that there arose a new judge or God called a new judge, and that's pretty much it. And it seems to be pretty much their military leaders. Deborah seems to be a little bit more than just a military leader. There's not a lot that's said about her, but there's not a lot said about most of the judges. Really the only judge that we get a backstory on, learning about his family and his everybody, that kind of led up to his judgeship, is Samson. He's the only one that we really get a clear picture of, what might have happened to a judge. Deborah is the first that we get this with. And again, while it's not a lot, it does tell us a couple of key things, really important things. First of all, we know she's married. Don't know she has kids. Doesn't say. We don't know anything about Lapidoth. He's not mentioned anywhere else. And so we don't know much about him. Or we don't know anything about him anywhere else. Deborah seems to be such an important person that she has a palm tree named after her. Now, you could say, well, big deal, it's a palm tree. But the trees that were associated with these kinds of women were probably holy sites, in the sense that they're not altars. I mean, it doesn't say that there was an altar there, but it does seem to indicate that everybody knew where it was. And so it was a monument, it was a site of renown, because it's called Tamor Devorah. I mean, it's called the Deborah palm tree. And so she would stay there and be in that area, and it's in the area of Ephraim and in the northern part of Israel, not far north, but above Jerusalem in the northern kingdom, what will be the northern kingdom. And so she's essentially kind of hanging out in that area. And the people came to her. It says the people came to her for judgment. Oh, very important too. She's a prophet. She's Neviah, Isha Neviah. She is a prophet. Same words that we use for Moses. As a matter of fact, there has not been a prophet since Moses, because Joshua is not called a prophet. It's not what he is. He's a leader. He's a military leader. He's a Nasi. He's a president, if you will, but he's not a prophet. So technically speaking, this is the only prophet that we've actually heard of since Moses. Doesn't mean she was the only one. It's the only one that we've had called out by name since. So here we have a woman who is a prophet and a judge. So, and again, you didn't have, I mean, it wasn't even an assumption that you did both. Both of them are terms of authority and respect and recognition no matter what. And she had both titles. So she's a prophet and a judge. Now, when she's a judge, it says that people came to her for judgment. Now, again, you can say, well, she's a judge. What does she do? She judges. So we're not exactly sure all of what that entailed. We really aren't. We don't know, because we're in chapter 5 of Judges, and the judges so far seem to pretty much be military leaders from the few things that we've seen about them. And they seem to be chosen by God to do that, to lead the Israelites. But there seems to be here this idea that it's not just military leadership, that there actually is some type of judgment that they gave, which means that they were essentially interpreting the law, or they were providing decisions or leadership on crucial matters that people would come to her for. She didn't go to them. They came to her. They came up to her. So it's very difficult. It's very difficult not to recognize how important at least Deborah is as a Jewish woman leader. We know that there are Jewish women who have led and who've been respected before that. Essentially, Miriam is a leader to some extent in her own right. The Bible accords her that. The Midrash accords her that. There's a recognition that she has a leadership role for the people in the wilderness from the time they left Egypt. But the difference here is that Miriam, you could say, was a leader because of her connection to Moses. We don't know anything about her husband, Lapidot. He's not mentioned anywhere else. There doesn't seem to be any reason for her to be famous because of him, though there are midrashim that Lapidot actually is, somebody of importance. Look, this woman by herself is a prophet and a judge. Either one of those things would have made her significant, yet she is both. So how important was she in Jewish history? Well, she's important enough for us to, as we already discussed, perhaps be the oldest person mentioned in a text, if the Song of Deborah is indeed the oldest text we have in the Bible. So, what's the takeaway from this? The bottom line is, you cannot argue the role of Jewish women in the Bible. You cannot argue that they're somehow popped in, or that they were not significant except for this or that. The story of Deborah is the story of a woman who leads the people, at least for a significant point of time between the time of Moses and the time of King David. And there's no question about it. It's not, well, she was a woman and she still got to lead. There's not one statement in these two lines that indicate that this was out of the ordinary, that this was not acceptable, that this was an exception to the rule.
But
There's
there's
nothing
midrash.
there's nothing qualifying it.
But there's midrash, right? Saying that because there was no worthy man at the time, they made Deborah.
There's a lot of questions. I mean, there's no question that the rabbis have a problem with the fact that there is this woman who clearly has this role that by the time of the rabbis, women are not, they don't have those roles of leadership. They just don't.
So that says more about the rabbis than it does about Deborah.
It doesn't, there's nothing in this story anywhere before or after it. You just read the lines where there's any indication that this was something bizarre. Now, again, you're right. The Midrash says that. The Talmud says that. It was written by men who were trying to explain, well, what about, they're essentially saying, well, can't women lead today? And so they're kind of giving you an answer, which is, well, I guess if there's no man that can lead, maybe. By the way, they essentially do say that. So women are allowed to do almost anything in the rabbinic period and up through the Middle Ages. Women were allowed to be moils. They were allowed to teach and give judgments in cases, in situations where there were no men who were qualified. Now, that's not equal rights by any, I'm not saying that, but it does indicate that there are times and places where women clearly, the rabbis recognize where they might be the level, on the level of authority. Is it because there's a vacuum? Maybe, but here there doesn't seem to be any of that indicated. And I would say, to the contrary, because there's no qualification over her significance here, it's very possible that there were other women prophets. Were there other women judges? Perhaps. The book of Judges may not capture every judge who ever ruled as a judge. So there could have been other women judges. All I'm saying is that there's no qualification here of saying, well, she was the only woman, the only person capable. No one else could do anything. This doesn't exist. I mean, look, the Midrash goes well out of its way to explain why Deborah was what she was. As a matter of fact, there's even a Midrash that Lapidot is another name for Barak, the guy we're about to read. Why? The guy has this guy Lapidot is her husband. It says he's her husband. We don't know anything about him, but they don't like the fact that we don't know anything about him, and they don't like the fact that that we don't have an indication of what. Sorry. Of why why this guy is why this guy is mentioned once, and where did Barak come from? Again, we'll get to that. There's no indication, but there's a lot of there's oftentimes no indication of why a man does what he does. All right, so the people came to her. Now let's read about Barak.
And she sent and called Barak, the son of Avinoam, out of Kadesh Naphtali, and said to him, has not the Lord God of Israel commanded, saying, go and gather your men to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men of the children of Naphtali and of the children of Zebulun, and I will draw out to you to the Wadi of Kishon Sisera, the captain of Yavin's army, with his chariots and his multitude, and I will deliver him into your hand.
Yeah. So she calls for Barak, who's all we know is he's the son of Avinoam. And he lives assumedly in Kadesh Naphtali. Kadesh literally means holy. So it's probably like a holy shrine, or there's a place we know of as Kadesh there's a few different places called Kadesh, but this one in particular is in Naphtali, which means it's in the far north of Israel. It's not like in the middle of Israel where she is oftentimes. I wouldn't say middle, but middle north. This is far north, and this is in the Galilee. So we assume this is all the way up in almost by the border of Lebanon. And there are actually been some excavations at Kadesh Naphtali. University of Michigan and University of Minnesota jointly did a excavation, but not on the ancient areas, on more of the newer stuff, the stuff that's only 1,000 years old, the Crusader era, and some of the Turkish times. We don't know much about this area, and again, it's not where she is. She's further south. She's by Mount Tabor, which is not far away from Bet Shan, that area that we went to. We go to every trip to Israel, we go to Bet Shan, which was a Roman era city in that part of Israel, north central Israel, just before you get up into the Galilee. And she's living in that, or at least working in that area. But the tribes that she's engaging here, particularly Naphtali and Zebulun, are in the far north. And so these are Galilean tribes, tribes that would have been in the region of where Hatzor is, which is where Sisera and King Yavin are based. 900 chariots that they have is a significant army. It's not beyond the realm of what could have happened, but it does seem to be more than like just one city. 900 chariots seems to indicate like this is a confederation of Canaanite peoples, as you're going to see, and it's involving these tribes in the north. So it seems to be somewhat regional. It's not like all the whole country is mobilizing against this, but this is a lot of people. I mean, 10,000 people against 900 chariots, assumedly. Again, a lot of maybe some infantry that the Canaanites have, but the 900 chariots are the scary thing, because 900 chariots could obliterate 10,000 people, because they're essentially tanks going against infantry, and it could be terrible. So it's not an easy battle. Would not be an easy battle. It would be a fairly large battle. Is it out of the realm of possibility of this period? No, but it would be very big. It would be a very big battle. And as you can see, Deborah tells this to him. It almost seems like Barak knows what he's supposed to do, because she says, has not the Lord commanded us? It seems as though maybe Barak already got this message from God and hasn't mobilized yet. So he's essentially coming from the north, meeting further south, and then going to war against the Canaanites in her area, in her territory. Keep this in mind, because you'll see some of the differences in her song. But essentially what she said is, I will draw him out to the Wadi of Kishon, which is the river, the arroyo, if you will, that's down there at below the Mount Tabor. And you'll defeat him. So she tells Barak, and Barak's name is essentially, it's lightning, and it's like, this is lightning, thunder. I mean, this is a scary, this is the guy's name is essentially like power. It's like Thor. Barak has a scary name, and he sounds like he's a tough guy. By the way, do you think it's a coincidence that one of Israel's generals and then later prime ministers for a very brief point in time, his name is Ehud Barak? I mean, the names that were chosen, and he didn't choose his name, his parents chose his name. But you have Ehud, who's the guy that we just read about in the last story, who killed the king of Moab. And then you have Barak. Now, Ehud was not a Hebrew name for a long, long time. Like, Jews were not named Ehud very, very, very frequently. Shlomo, Moshe, Avraham, Yitzhak, those names, Yaakov, those were all really good Jewish names. Ehud didn't really become popular until the modern nation of Israel. So Ehud Barak was born in, just before Israel's establishment. He was born in 42. So he was born just before Israel was established, but his parents were, living in pre-mandate, Palestine, and were immigrants, from Europe. And they named their son Ehud because this is a tough Hebrew name, right? And they changed their name. Their original name was Brog, was their Russian, B-R-O-G, Brog. And, it's not a bad name or anything, but it's not a Hebrew name. And so they changed their name to Barak, from Brog to Barak. It sounds kind of similar, right? So here you have a name that captures these two generals, these two military leaders, generals or military leaders, tough guys. And so this is kind of how you create a new myth of a strong Israel. And again, he was a general. He was actually one of the leaders of the Sayeret Maktal, which is the commandos. And he was on several missions that have been talked about, where he actually went behind enemy lines and was a very highly decorated commando in his own right, and very much doing the kinds of things that Ehud or Barak would have done. So so it's an interesting, he was actually, I think technically Ehud Barak is the last person that defeated Netanyahu in an election, because remember, it's not that he didn't lose, but Netanyahu didn't really, he didn't really lose this last election, in the sense that, they formed a government around him, if you will, ignored him, but he didn't really lose. His party won the most votes. But in 99, Ehud Barak beat him by a huge margin. He beat Netanyahu. Anyways, so that's modern Israel reincorporating these ideas. So let's take a look at what Barak says. So Deborah says, come up here, let's go. Come down here, let's go to battle. Everything will be good. God will deliver them into your hands. And look what Barak's response was.
And Barak said to her, if you will go with me, then I will go. But if you will not go with me, then I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. However, you will scarcely attain honor on the journey that you go, for the Lord will yield Sisera into the hand of a woman. And Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh.
So he says, I'll go into battle, but only if you go with me. Now, this is a weird scene for a lot of reasons, and the rabbis build on it, the Midrash builds on it, because essentially here's a woman who basically says, look, if you don't want to be the military hero, you won't be, because you won't get the credit for it. And so she's basically saying you should do your job. And again, the rabbis interpret this to be women should not lead people in militarily. They shouldn't be leaders in that way. And she tries to tell him that. And he says, no, I'll have none of it. If you don't go, I don't go. So it's basically saying, I don't have enough confidence to go myself. You have to go with me. And so again, the argument is that Deborah is not only powerful and smart and but she also knows her place to some extent, and tries to tell Barak, that's not my place. Now, everybody at this point, if you've never read the story, assumes that what she's saying to him is, if you don't lead the people by yourself, I'm going to get the credit for it. That's what you would assume at this point, is that she's speaking about herself. Do your job, otherwise I'm going to get the credit for it. That's what it appears, because when she says Sisera will fall to the hand of a woman, you're assuming, oh, she's talking about if I go into battle, then I'm going to defeat him too, and everyone's going to say I defeated him. That's the most obvious point. If the story stopped here, that's what you'd think would happen, right? That's normal. So she gets up and she does it. And it's interesting, by the way, because it says that she got up, she arose, which again, it's almost as if she was not supposed to get out of that tree. She's supposed to stay at that tree. That's her place. That's where she is. But she gets up. You move Deborah now, and now this is going to go a different way. And there seems to be that little feeling like, okay, you got me up. I didn't want to get up. Maybe she's older, by the way. Maybe, she could be in her 80s by this point. She's like, I don't need this, right? I don't need to get in. I don't need to get on my horse or donkey. I don't need to get up and go anywhere. You know what you're supposed to do? Leave me alone. We don't know, but it does seem like she didn't have to get up and she didn't have to do anything other than, inspire him.
Don't we see this kind of with the kings later? That they don't want to really be king. They, maybe this is supposed to be a good thing. They're humble. Moses didn't want to be leader.
Yeah, but
Moses didn't say, I'm only crossing the Red Sea if Miriam comes with me.
That's true.
so there seems to be he definitely seems to lack confidence. He definitely seems to feel that he can't accomplish this mission without her, which again, like by our standards, we're like, okay, well, he seems to need a little confidence booster, but
What a wuss.
but there definitely was a sense in a less egalitarian time that, wow, this guy really is I'll use your word. He really is a wuss. So there is this sense that he really didn't need to do this. And so there's going to be a consequence to this. So here's what happens.
Now Hever the Kenite, who was of the children of Havav, the father-in-law of Moses, had severed himself from Cain and pitched his tent near the oak in Zaananim, which is by Kadesh.
Okay, so let's just explain what this weird sentence is, because we just have another character added to the story who really doesn't seem to be connected to the story at all. Like, where does this guy even come from? Why? Well, there's a couple things that go on in this story that we really should pay attention to, really pay attention to, which is there is where do we start? So first, who are the Kenites? The Kenites seem to be Midianites. They seem to be a nomadic tribe or tribes that are not necessarily indigenous to one area in the sense that they can go from place to place. Hever is one of these Kenites. And here it says that the Kenites are descendants of Hovab, which is another name, it seems like, for Reuel and another name for Yitro. All of these names are names for Moses' father-in-law. Now, is it possible that Hovab was a different father-in-law of Moshe, that Moses was married to more than one woman? Yes. However, it does seem to be connected to these traditions that Moses, as the Bible tells us, is married to a Midianite woman. Midianites and Kenites could have been used interchangeably. And the fact that he's already called by two names in the Bible, Reuel and Yitro, if we add another name to it, Hobab, not necessarily the end of the world, in that there could have been different traditions of what Moses' father-in-law's name was. The Midrash will say, well, people got called different things, which is why you could have Lapidot and Barak maybe being the same person, even though they clearly don't seem to be the same person in the story. They have no issue in the Bible saying somebody is known by more than one name. Okay. All of these things about the Kenite are also to the point that they're not Hebrews. They're not Israelites. They might be Hebrews actually, but they're not Israelites. And it's not Hever meaning Hebrew. It's Hever with a chet, which comes more from the root of friend, of Haver, of being a friend. He seems to be a guy who lives kind of wherever he wants. And he doesn't seem to be hanging out with the rest of the Canaanites, which, by the way, is the same name as Cain, It's the same name as Cain and Abel guy. Yeah. Are those also traditions that the Kenites are descendants of Cain? Perhaps. The bottom line is that he's not living with the rest of the Canaanites. And as we're about to see, he seems to be friendly with these Canaanites, not Kenites, but Canaanites, people from Canaan, like Sisera and Yavin. So we're going to see why he's important. But they just introduced him, cut away to another guy and another story. We have multiple stories going along, which is the way we love telling stories like this today, right? Having multiple stories coming together at a moment, right? Bringing different characters together. We just had a little other guy. So we have Deborah, and if we're looking at this screenplay, we've got Deborah doing her stuff, we've got Barak doing his stuff, and now we have Hever the Kenite doing his thing. And we also have Sisera and Yavin doing their thing. So we've got 4 different parallel stories that are about to come together.
And they told Sisera that Barak, the son of Avinoam, was gone up to Mount Tabor. And Sisera gathered together all his chariots, 900 chariots of iron, and all the people that were with him, from Haroshet Haggayim to the Wadi of Kishon.
So that's why it seems to be more than just his city of Chatzor or his one city-state, Canaanite city-state. It seems to be a lot of people. Now, a lot of Canaanites are getting together.
And Deborah said to Barak, "Up, for this is the day on which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Is not the Lord gone out before you?" So Barak went down from Mount Tabor and 10,000 men after him. And the Lord confounded Sisera and all his chariots and all his host with the edge of the sword before Barak, so that Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away by foot.
Yeah. Now, this is the scope of the battle, at least as it's given in the narrative. Not a whole lot. Now, people have loved playing this out. They've loved trying to figure out what happened at the battle of Tabor, Mount Tabor. It seems as though the chariots go into battle, and then they are routed, they're scattered. It is a calamity, if you will, for the Canaanites. Of course, whenever you read something like this, you gotta post up the people love doing this stuff. They love showing. I'm going to show you a little battle map. It's just not that much. I mean, the reality is but people love showing these kind of battle maps, especially when they're into like risk and looking at moving soldiers around a table board. So you've got this battle here where the Naphtali and Zebulun tribes together. There's Chatzor. This is where Yavin is located, the king of the Canaanites. This is where Sisera comes from, Haroshet Hagoyim, which is kind of in the middle of this is the Wadi Kishon. This is the river. This is the plain. This is Haifa here, over here. This is Mount Carmel. So this is what we call the Jezreel Valley. Here's Jezreel. But this whole valley here, there's a river that runs through this valley. It's a fairly narrow valley, beautiful valley, Galilee.
It's Accho, Akko?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And so here's Akko. This is the area between Haifa and Akko, this little bay. So the Kishon River runs down here, and here's Megiddo, right? This is the plain of Megiddo. This is where a lot of battles were fought, because this is kind of like this is the border between like northern Israel and the south. And once you can kind of like conquer through here, then you can conquer the rest of Israel. So Har Megiddo, right here, Mount Megiddo, is Armageddon. Armageddon was supposed to be fought right here in the same area. So here we have a battle fought between people in the north. They're both from the north. I mean, that's the weird thing is that this is where Yavin was. This is where Naphtali and Zebulun are. The battle is fought right here in this area, Kadesh. And here's Mount Tabor. This is where Deborah was. And these are the different tribes: Issachar, Zebulun, Naphtali, Asher. And so these are the northern tribes. And the battle, even though you'd think it would be like fought up here, is actually fought here. And you can say, well, why? Because this is the heartland of again, the north. And if you control this valley, you basically can control the north and right up, basically right up into that area. Here's Beth Shan. This is the area that the Roman city that we go to a lot. And here's Mount Tabor. So we're only talking about 5-10 miles, 5 miles actually from here to here. It's not far. And so this area here is where this battle is going to be fought. This is a narrow area. This is not like, literally we're talking about the distance from one part of Santa Clarita across the valley of, in Santa Clarita. We're not talking about, a day's ride. We're talking about literally people fighting in an area that, we're not talking a huge distance here. So here is where the battle is fought. Well, actually the battle is fought here in Kadesh. And this is where he starts to escape to. This is where, as we're about to read, as he's fleeing, he flees out this direction. And again, it really is a great story if you think about it. It's, these different people that get brought together in this moment. But we don't get a lot of battle, like people who are like looking for battle stuff. There's like I see people. I've seen books that are written about battles of the Bible. It's like there's no battle here. I mean, if you really
The reenactors would have a hard time. You'd have to make up a lot.
Exactly. What do you get here? Anyways, they were confounded by God, the armies and the chariots. And of course, they don't have chariots. So again, people try to figure out like what happened. Like, let's imagine this battle. And so, the normal thing is that, the chariots get, they fight in such a way that the chariots essentially become ineffective. Either they're going up a hill or, they're in a way that they're not fighting, floodplain, whatever. Something happens here which renders the tanks essentially inoperable. And so this gives Barak and his numerically, advantaged armies a chance to really go nuts. And so Sisera, all we're told is he gets out of his chariot and flees by foot, which seems to indicate like the chariot meant nothing at this point, right? So he got out of his tank, if you will, got out of his airplane, and he has no advantage now, and he's fleeing by foot. Now, here's what happens.
But Barak pursued after the chariots and after the host, as far as Haroshet Haggim, and all the host of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. There was not a man left. But Sisera fled away by foot to the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite, for there was peace between Yavin, the king of Hator, and the house of Heber the Canaanite.
Yeah, so he goes in the other direction. His troops are going off in one direction, getting killed, mowed down, and Sisera goes the other way, and he goes to the tent of Yael, who is Heber's wife. Now, we haven't read about Yael before. Is she a Hebrew? Doesn't seem that way. She could be if she was a Hebrew married to Heber the Kenite, because Heber the Kenite is not. And not only that, is Heber the Kenite is an ally of Yavin. So let's assume that Heber is a nomad. He has his tribe. He's got maybe some adult sons and nephews and whatever that are part of his group, and they have a peace treaty. They're allowed to graze, and maybe they provide soldiers occasionally for a battle or whatever. They help keep the peace. They make sure that everybody makes sure that they know Yavin is the king. There's peace. It's what the word says. There's shalom between Yavin and the house of Hever. So this is an ally. This is at least Yavin and Hever are allies. Yael, for whatever reason, decides, as we're about to see, she's going to take matters into her own hands. And here's the story.
And Yael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn in, my lord, turn into me, fear not." And when he had turned into the tent, she covered him with a blanket. And he said to her, "Give me, I pray you, a little water to drink, for I am thirsty." And she opened a bottle of milk and gave him drink and covered him. Then he said to her, "Stand in the door of the tent, and it shall be, if any man comes and inquires of you and says, 'Is there anyone here?' that you shall say no." Then Yael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the tent peg into his temple and fastened it to the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary. So he died.
That is usually what happens when someone drives a tent peg through your head,
Into your head, yes.
is that you usually do go off and die. So this is a very violent. This is a very
She
violent.
drove it. She drove it all the way through his skull. Think about that.
That is a. She
That's
nailed
a
him. She nailed him.
powerful
As we say.
blow.
She nailed him. Now, the fact that we just read a story about Ehud killing somebody in the bathroom, and now we have somebody killing a guy while he's sleeping, is a.
She pegged him.
Yes, she pegged him. Oh gosh, this is. I didn't say that, by the way. Anyways, that was not me. I'm repeating what somebody
you
else.
said nailed him.
Yes, I said nailed him. But anyways, I will say that there is a assumption to some extent of some seduction that goes on here too, namely that it
Maybe
says
she
that-
drugged the milk.
look, it's that tryptophan effect. You have a little milk before you go to sleep. Remember, he only asked for water. He just said, "Give me some water to drink." She gives him a little milk. Yes. Did she poison the milk because maybe you wouldn't taste whatever she put into him? But it doesn't say she did. It says that just made him tired. That he
But it
was
seems
weird.
like someone would wake up. If you had a peg and
There's no reason why if she poisoned him that it wouldn't have said she poisoned him. It doesn't say that. It says she did this.
Maybe he was lactose intolerant.
He was weary. That's what made him weary.
Yeah.
But you think about the way you put in a tent peg. You gotta get down there and hold it with one hand.
Well, that was also part of the issue, is how did she get so close to him? And so there is this feeling like there's some kind of, well, there's an unnecessary closeness between them. First of all, she's there and her husband's not. Now that doesn't mean anything because they would have had separate tents. It's not like, oh, well, but she, of course, doesn't tell her husband what she's doing, or doesn't appear that she did. She could have, but doesn't appear that she did.
Maybe he helped, but because she was there with him, she got the credit. Like Deborah gets the credit for the battle.
Well, does she get the credit or does Yael get the credit? See, that's where the story took this weird turn, which is you assume when Deborah's talking about a woman's going to get the credit for it, you assume that it's her. Now here, of course, it's Yael that gets the credit for killing him. And so she actually gets the coup de grace. She actually is the hero of the story, if you will, militarily. So she is essentially getting the credit for it. Does Deborah get the credit for it too? Yeah, absolutely. The problem is a lot of people forget there are two women heroes in this story. They forget that the women on both ends of the story do that. But there is this sense that there is something intimate about this relationship, not just that, she's pouring him some milk, but that she is close enough to him to do this, but also that it says specifically that she covered him with a blanket. So doesn't
this point up the difference of how men would fight and how women would fight?
In what way?
Well, men don't need to get close. They can throw javelins or arrows or drive over people with tanks, or chariots, but women use their seductive powers their cleverness, their smarts, in order to win the battle. It's a totally different approach.
Yes. And
Poison is a woman's weapon as opposed to a sword.
yeah, but look
Exactly.
look what happens here, because she doesn't even use a sword. What she did was she could have used, and that's what we're going to take a look at the Judith story. She could have, assumedly, she could have used a sword. The way she did it was, it seems like you can make the argument she didn't have a sword. Okay. That is a possibility. She doesn't have a sword. She has a tent peg. She has a hammer. And
What happened to Sisera's sword?
she goes to work. Well, that's what happens in the Judith story. So yeah, it would be strange that he didn't have a sword. It'd be strange that there's not a sword around.
Yeah.
He didn't need his sword. He didn't know he was in danger.
But he would have had a sword
from the
he would have had a
battle.
sword with him.
Presumably, he had his
That's-
equipment with him.
That's
It
what
was
happens
not-
with the Judith story. But
Unless he got
there's
so tired that he dropped it.
whatever. It seems as though there would have been a sword somewhere around. What she did was far more brutal and far more like impressive than simply stabbing him and killing him. The Ehud story also is kind of impressive in that, he has this double-edged sword that, and literally it's a double-edged sword that they kind of go off on the fact that he has this sword that has double blades. But she does this in a way that's really, really astoundingly violent. And it's actually what it's doing is actually sending a statement. It's sending a statement that I got so close to the guy. Reverend Lynn's correct in the sense that there is a face-to-face confrontation here, which is really, really powerful. And that she did it in a way that literally sent a message to everybody that like, don't mess with us. And, when God says we're going to do something, we do it. Now, again, she's not an Israelite. So like, she didn't even have to do this. The whole level of this story is like, when you think about what happens, well, it didn't have to happen that way, because she could have used a sword. She actually turns this moment of hospitality into, and I think about what the ultimate symbol of it, like everything is here, because the tent, he comes into the tent, he turns into her tent, and she uses a tent peg to do it. And the hospitality that she offers him, the blanket, the milk, she goes above and beyond. And then she goes above and beyond in the ways that she kills him. She takes a tent peg from the tent and literally uses that to knock him into the ground. And it's not just she cut off his
I
head.
can't help
Almost
but
like-
think of Rosie the Riveter here.
It's almost like Native Americans and taking or touching coup,
Counting. coins.
Yep.
showing a bravery.
Yep. Yep. And it is taking it to a level that didn't have to be. So she didn't have, we have to assume that she didn't have to do this, which is kind of why the story of Judith takes it, I don't say down a notch, but actually takes it to a level where, okay, that makes sense. But this is graphically violent. And like, you can't read the story without like thinking about it later. Telling the story of a woman who literally takes the guy out in a way that, like you said, there's a moment where, if you think about it, taking a tent peg and a hammer, she's leaving herself open for him getting her. This is not like, well, she's got a sword, and if he wakes up, she just stabs him. There's a moment where if he gets up and she doesn't move quick, she's dead. So there's something about this, to me, that's really more than just killing the guy. It's sending a message that I risked my life, and I did it in a way that, I sent a message of how we're going to deal with the way we have to deal with these guys. So, like at every level of this story, I don't want to overdo it, but when it says that she opened the bottle of milk and gave him a drink, it's like she does it all herself too. It's not like she calls somebody in and say, hey, let's get some milk for this guy. She opened the bottle of milk, and which, by the way, assumes that, it's not like she just had some milk lying around. Like, this is a whole plan that she lays out, and that she does it herself. It's really, really a powerful scene. And because there is somebody else there, right? Um, so let's just see this right here. Okay, here we go. This is the way the story finishes. Yeah.
And behold, as Barak pursued Sisera, Yael came out to meet him and said to him, "Come, and I will show you the man whom you seek." And when he came into her tent, behold, Sisera lay dead, and the peg in his temple.
Wait, so wait right there. So the way she sets this up is when Barak finally comes to their place, Yael goes out to meet him and says, "Come, I'll show you the guy that you're looking for." And at this point, like, what does he think? He's tied up. Maybe he's dead. Maybe even he thinks that he's dead. But when he opens up the tent and sees the peg in his temple, it must have been like, he must have said, "Oh my God, like, I can't believe what I'm seeing here." And this is literally the guy that everybody's scared of. Sisera is now dead, vulnerable as you could be. And he's looking at this body of his enemy, killed by a woman. And in that moment, Barak, who maybe up to this point, like literally she's saying, "Hey, come, I'll show you the guy. I got him here. I've got him in here. I got the guy." He's still thinking maybe he's captured. Maybe he's not even like, maybe he doesn't, like, he's hiding out. Like maybe he thinks he's okay and she's going to turn him in, right? Wow. And the moment that he opens it up, like everything must have rushed into Barak's mind. And then what is he hit with? Oh my gosh, this is exactly what Deborah said to me. What Deborah told me that this was going to happen. And this is what people are going to remember. They're going to remember this scene. They're not going to remember that I beat the guy in battle, but that she killed him and she ended it. She ended it. Wow. And that's what the next line says. And it says that this is what happened.
So God subdued on that day Yavin, the king of Canaan, before the children of Israel. And the hand of the children of Israel prevailed more and more against Yavin, the king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Yavin, king of Canaan.
Yeah. And so what's really important about this, and this is the way the narrative ends, Yavin wasn't at the battle. It was Sisera that was at the battle. And so what had to happen was the people had to be inspired to go keep fighting against Yavin. So Sisera was it was his general, it was like his main guy, but he had other soldiers. He had maybe other chariots, maybe other cities that he could fight from. He wasn't over yet. They had to keep fighting. And it says they prevailed more and more against him until they finally destroyed him. And so what happens here is that the myth, the story of how these women were able to defeat this tyrant become an inspiration for people. And of course they told the story of these women who, if they, again, the message is, if they can do it, shouldn't we be able to do it? And so it's an inspiration of, Joan of Arc type of, the type of Mulan or whatever the female warrior was also supposed to kind of be a message for men saying, they did it, you should do it. So there is that sense of you should be doing. I mean, if the woman can do it, you definitely should be able to do it. There is that sense, and the rabbis do focus on that essentially the men are humiliated into action by the role of what these women did by believing in God and doing what they should have done in the first place, which is fight the Canaanites. And so this story, people forget, number one, how violent it is. They forget that Deborah is not the only heroine in the story. And to some extent, let's remind people that as a Kenite woman, Yael is actually the most marginalized of heroines, in the sense that if we're trying to picture what she would be like today, she is a woman who is literally without power, without any of the without any of the protections that an Israelite would have had, in the sense that she's not Canaanite and she's not Israelite. And so she is one of the heroines of the story, in a way that, again, it's kind of amazing how marginalized this woman would have been, how Yael would have really been almost the least likely heroine that you can imagine. And that's what the Bible just gave us. That the Bible just gave us a heroine that defies all norms, that like literally comes out of nowhere to inspire the people to do something they didn't believe they could do. So Yael is a very popular name in Israel today, in the sense that there are many women in Israel that are named Yael. It's also a more popular Hebrew name for girls that are not in Israel, but much more popular in Israel. I mean, maybe it's not as popular as it was 30, 40 years ago, but it's still a popular name. You'll still see a lot of Yael. Yael literally means a mountain goat. It means a mountain. That's what it is. It's a mountain goat, like an ibex. And but because of the biblical Yael, she becomes a heroine, another heroine. And not that Deborah isn't a popular name, but Yael has become a much more popular name than it ever was. Deborah has been a popular Hebrew name for a very long time. Deborah never really went out of vogue. There aren't many women who are I mean, there are Hebrew names that were, clearly she's an Israelite. She is a prophet. She's a judge. So her name would always be associated with good qualities necessarily, but her name literally means a bee. That's what Deborah means. It's a bee, like a bumblebee. So that is these names that, again, are completely, as I said today, in Israel, are very acceptable, common names. But Yael, probably, I don't know the numbers, but there are definitely more Yaels now than Devorah. I don't know, a lot more. Maybe it's close, but there were used to be very few Yaels. So that is the story. Now we're going to change tone, in that we're going to now read the Song of Deborah. So this is chapter 5. It's laid out as a song, as a poem. And this is the Song of Deborah. We even have musical accompaniment for it.
Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Avinoam, on that day, saying, in the time of tumultuous strife in Israel, when the people willingly offered themselves, praise the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes. I will sing to the Lord. I will intone a melody to the God of Israel.
Right. And so it definitely seems like this is a song. Because sometimes the word song can also mean poem. This one really does seem to have a couple of words that are used for the words of music, because it says Ashira, and it says right here, Vatasher Devorah, which, by the way, it says, then sang Deborah and Barak. It says both of them sang the song.
But Deborah gets the credit.
Yes.
Just like she said.
Just like she said, in the time of tumultuous strife. And again, that is a play on words, but it says here, I will intone a melody. This is the translation of the word azamer, which is here. So you have Ashirah, which is I will sing to the Lord, or I will sing. And then it says azamer, I will intone to God. And so, and both words are used, Lord, Yud He Vav He, and Elohe, the word God. So that's why it says Lord and God. So the word azamer is almost always used for music, and not just a poem that people would say without musical accompaniment, which is why they use the word melody there. It's a good translation, especially if you're looking for synonyms for singing. So azamer is the and it's again the word when we say klezmer, klezmer means musical instruments. That's what the word klezmer actually means. It means musical instruments. Clay means tools or instruments, and zemer is song. So klezmer literally means instruments of song or musical instruments. So that's all it means. But it doesn't really seem like this is a musical song. So here's the song, and it says, here it is. Everybody, I will sing to the Lord, I will intone a melody. Here's kind of like, that's the prologue, or that's the way the song begins. I will sing to song, song would start there, but here's the story, if you will.
Lord, when you did go out of Seir, when you did march out of the field of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. The clouds also dropped water.
I thought you were
The
going to
mount-
sing. I thought you were going to sing it. No, I'm just kidding. If you knew the melody for this, it'd be very.
If I knew the melody, I'd sing it.
Rosemary, it'd be very impressive.
I'm sure it's been set to music many
Yes,
times.
I'm sure, but if you knew the original melody, it'd be very impressive.
If I could sing it in Hebrew, then I
No, but if you knew the
Yes.
original melody, you'd literally, that'd be a divine moment. We'd literally have to say, this is truly a miracle. Anyways, here's the song.
The mountains melted from before the Lord, the Sinai before the Lord, God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, the son of Anat, in the days of Yael, the highways were unoccupied and the travelers walked through crooked byways. The inhabitants of the villages ceased. They ceased in Israel until I, Deborah, arose. I, a mother in Israel.
Yeah. So we do read about Shamgar again. Somebody that we read about, as we said at the end of chapter 3. We don't know much about him. It's clearly the same guy. He's clearly, a guy who also is known as a judge. But there seems to be this sense that in this time, things were difficult. Well, we already knew that at the beginning, but there's another kind of way of saying this, which is that people couldn't travel without fear, right? They were worried about they were worried for their safety, and like kind of what the ultimate statement about lawlessness is, whether people can travel the roads without worrying about. And I guess we still have the same way of deciding whether we live in safe times or not safe times, whether there are areas that we feel afraid to drive through, or whether we
They stayed off the main road because I guess there were bandits.
Yep.
And they had to walk crooked paths to.
Yep. And so they had to kind of stay out of sight, which is scary. But again, it's one of the things that people gave credit to the Romans for, was that they had this series of highways and a series of open and safe lines of transportation that people said, hey, Romans are good at that. They're maintaining law and order, if you will. But I actually just saw it last night. I finally got to see News of the World with Tom Hanks. I finally got to see that movie, but it's part of that narrative that takes place in 1870 in Texas, when right after a civil war, where people were not always safe traveling on the highways and byways of the United States, where they were afraid of different things. So the movie touches on this journey of a few days that starts off in Wichita Falls and ends up in San Antonio, and gives you kind of an idea really of what traveling across even just one state would have been like during that time, the kind of people that you would meet, and some of the scary things, including, by the way, there were bandits that were hiding out in the early 1900s in our own backyard here in the passes of Santa Clarita. So yeah, it seems as though this was the situation until, as Deborah says, I arose. So
Well-
it is,
I have a question about verse 7.
yeah.
My translation, our text says it shows that the song was composed about Deborah, not by Deborah. And yet in this translation, it says I, Deborah, but my translation does not say I, Deborah, it just says Deborah.
So the word shakamti is used twice, which is why it says I arose and it says I, Deborah, arose. But you could say, so it says ad shakamti dvorah shakamti amba Yisrael. The word shakamti means I arose. So it's there's no
Okay.
question that the conjugation of this verb, the T at the end of it means I arose. And again, what's interesting about it is that this seems to be consistent, or at least the writer of the narrative was consistent with I got up, which is kum, to get up, which literally means, to go up in some cases. But here it really means like I got up and I stood up, like I stood up for, and we still use that word, right? I stood up for my people, or I stood up for,
Right.
my beliefs. So she stood up, but here it's clearly, it's the past singular, and it is. She says, "I, Deborah, arose." So she's talking about herself, not even in the third person. She just refers to herself as Deborah, as I, Deborah, arose. And I am
Right.
the mother. I arose as a mother in Israel, which is a great phrase, that Embe Yisrael, a mother in Israel, which is clearly not Barak. I mean, the
Right.
person who arose here was me,
Is Deborah.
and I'm the mother of Israel, which is what was a great line.
Thank you.
They chose new gods. Then was war in the gates. Was there a shield or spear seen among 40,000 in Israel? My heart goes out to the governors of Israel that offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord.
Keep going. One more line.
You that ride on tawny she-asses, you that sit on couches, and you that walk by the way, tell the tale. Louder than the voices of the archers in the places of drawing water. Let them recite the righteous acts of the Lord, the righteous acts towards the inhabitants of his villages in Israel, when the people of the Lord went down to the gates.
Yeah. So there seems to be this understanding that this should inspire people, right? So that there's this sense that maybe in the future, when you're not feeling very confident, that you'll also do this. And of course, what's important is that it's God. It's not me. It wasn't, I did it. This was God that did it. And I didn't do it by myself. I did it because people got off their butts and they did the work themselves, right? So there's an acknowledgement of God. There's an acknowledgement of the people that fought. And of course, people had to go out and fight. But what's interesting about it is there's this understanding that as much as there's a acknowledgement that in battle, that's where people are tested, the reality is that the real noise should be made for praising God. It's louder than the voices of the archers. So as loud as the archers call out when they're sending off their arrows, people should talk about the righteous acts of God. And of course, it says in the places where people draw water, which is essentially like in the public area, let people talk about it, right? Let this be known. Let this be talked about everywhere and by the water cooler. No, it meant more than that, really, because the places of drawing water, the fancy way of saying by the well, was the middle of town. It was where everyone would know. And so and the gates where people would all congregate. So these areas should be where people talk about these things. It shouldn't be a secret. It shouldn't be silent. It should be proclaimed loudly in front of everybody. And here's this beautiful Uri, Uri, Uri.
Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song, arise, Barak, and lead away your captives, you son of Avinoam.
Yep. And so that phrase Uri, Uri, which we say, is awake, awake. We use that same line Uri, Uri in Lachadodi. We use it in other parts of the Bible as well.
I can hear Debbie Freeman.
So it's the song of Deborah, and she's the first person who says it. And it seems, again, she's saying it about herself, but there is this sense of this is what happens when you fight, and you actually stand up. And so it is, yes. So as Yael is saying, there is a song called Deborah's Song by Debbie Friedman, and that is the heart of the song, Uri, Uri. Shir dub, Uri, Uri, Dabri Shir. So we'll play it at the end. But it is really an inspiring phrase. Yeah, it probably should have been sung more. So let's read. We're about to get to the some telling parts of it.
Then he made a remnant have dominion over the nobles of the people. The Lord made me have dominion over the mighty ones. From Ephraim they came, but rooted in Amalek, beyond you, Benjamin with your tribes. From Machir came down leaders, and from Zebulun, those that handle the marshal's staff.
Yeah. Now, this is where we're going to get into some interesting differences between the song and the story we previously read. We have other tribes that are mentioned here that are not mentioned in the story already. Ephraim and Benjamin. Doesn't say that they were in there. It says Naphtali and Zebulun originally. And we've read Zebulun now. We've read Zebulun, but not Ephraim and Benjamin. Oh, and Machir, right? That's part of the tribe of Manasseh, right? Yeah, I almost passed over that one. So you have Ephraim, Benjamin, Machir, which was part of Manasseh, and Zebulun. There's 4 tribes mentioned there. Only one of them we've even read about. Here we go.
And the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. As was Issachar, so was Barak. Into the valley they rushed forth at his feet. In the divisions of Reuben, great were the resolves.
Okay. Oh, keep going.
Why then did you sit among the sheepfolds to hear the bleatings of the flocks? For the divisions of Reuben, great were the heart searchings. Gilad dwells beyond the Jordan. And why did Dan remain by the ships? Asher continued on the seashore and abode by his bays.
Yeah. And so
she's calling him out for not joining the fight.
Yeah, exactly. So read one more, the Zebulun.
Zebulun was like a people that jeoparded their lives to the death, and Naphtali likewise on the high places of the field.
Okay, so here we go back to Naphtali and Zebulun, which were the tribes that we were called out in the beginning. But there are other tribes that were mentioned as fighting in this battle, and there were tribes that were called out for not fighting in this song that also doesn't seem to quite make sense. So Ephraim, Benjamin, Machir, which is Manasseh, Zebulun, Issachar, and Naphtali. so here you have 6 tribes that got mentioned as fighting, a couple like Dan and Asher that didn't fight and get, as Rosemary rightly said, get called out. But these are northern tribes. These are all northern tribes that you'd expect would be in the battle. Yet only Naphtali and Zebulun were mentioned initially as fighting in the 4th chapter. So there's a difference here. Again, you could say it's written by a different author, whatever, but the author, assuming that the author of chapter 4 wrote after this version of it, why did that person only choose to talk about Naphtali and Zebulun fighting? And so this is we don't have a great answer for why there's this discrepancy between them. Like, why are these things kept like this? Why are Naphtali and Zebulun called out in chapter 4 and in chapter 5? They're not the only ones. So that's part of, kind of the question of why do you have this change? Was it written, hundreds of years later? And by that point, it really didn't matter that these other, we don't know. There's not a good answer for why they're not mentioned, because if the older version has them there, then why not include it here? One of the things that kind of gives away when it's written is, at this point, we know later on the tribe of Dan, the Bible tells us, we read it in the book of Joshua, actually, that they actually move up to the north. Dan moves up to a different area. Originally, they're by Tel Aviv. And then they move, the tribe actually moved en masse up to the north, up until the far north on the border of Lebanon. So here, they're still along the coast, which is one of the kind of the giveaways of when this was written. But there seems to be this idea that the northern tribes were more involved in this. More of those tribes were involved in this battle than what we originally have. And again, did the version of in chapter 4 just cut it out and just say, look, it doesn't matter, it doesn't really matter. But Naphtali and Zebulun are not the only tribes that you would have thought would have been involved in this based on the geography of where the battle happened. So it's not like it's not like the chapter 5 version is less accurate, because it seems like it probably was closer to the events, and it seems to indicate that there were other tribes involved that would make sense.
So are there 2 sources here, like the P source and the?
Well, they're not the sources that we don't know who wrote this poem. We don't. It says that Deborah did. Deborah and Barak did. But even if it wasn't written by them, there seems to be a distance of time between them based on the language, based on some of the linguistic secrets here, but also the references, and specifically this reference to Dan here being still along the coast and not as they ended up being kind of inland and close to the border of Lebanon. So, but again, the way the story ends, the song ends, it says here that Zebulun and Naphtali were kind of in the midst of it. And maybe that's why chapter 4 only focuses on them. It seems like they were the ones who were the most involved in the battle. But again, if Deborah is prophesizing around Mount Tabor, she's in Issachar's territory. It doesn't mean she's from the tribe of Issachar. Didn't say that. Both people say that she was, but we don't know. But the fact is that it does make sense that these other tribes would have been involved with this battle. So let's read a little bit more of the battle. And this is a little bit more descriptive, but I wouldn't say necessarily helpful, but it's descriptive of the battle a little bit more than maybe the narrative was, interestingly.
The kings came and fought Then fought the kings of Canaan in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo. They took no gain of silver. They fought from heaven. The stars in their courses fought against Sisera.
Yeah, and the and it's not that they fought like the kings were fighting amongst themselves. If the kings came down and fought, and again, it's a biblical poetry, and it's a repetition of the line. Ba'u malchim nilchamu, az nilchamu malchei Canaan. The kings came out and fought, and here's how the kings fought. And it says here that they fought by Tanakh, which is not the Tanakh. It's written a little differently, but though they sound the same. The word Tanakh is a place by Megiddo. So there, Megiddo is flat out mentioned. So we don't have to guess where exactly they fought. Fought by the waters of Megiddo.
And they got no loot.
Got nothing. You get nothing. But of course, it says here, Min Hashamayim, from the sky, right? The stars fought against them, which is another way of saying they were doomed, right? You looked up in the sky and knew that their stars were fighting against the stars of their enemies.
The Wadi of Kishon swept them away. That ancient brook, the brook of Kishon. O my soul, march on in strength. Then did the horse hoofs beat from the frantic galloping of his mighty ones. Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord. Curse bitterly its inhabitants, because they did not come to the help of the Lord, against the mighty men.
Yep. So
now we have some details from the battle.
Yeah. And so we get a little bit more of where the battle were fought. Meroz gets called out in particular. This is considered to be like a town in particular that gets called out. I will tell you that because of the previous verses of the stars fought in the heavens, there's this idea that we have in the Talmud that Meroz is actually a constellation. Also because the angel of
extraterrestrials.
Yes, because the angel, it's also partly because the angel of the Lord calls them out. But yes, Meroz was probably a place, right?
That would make the reenactment more fun with aliens.
Yes, but Meroz is either a place of cowardice, or again, it seems like the rabbis didn't want Meroz to be a place of cowardice, but that it actually is another planetary sphere, as they would call it. So maybe, but it seems like on the face of it, it's a town in the area that didn't come out and fight with us, other Israelites who didn't fight. Now we get to the role of Yael.
Blessed above women is Yael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Blessed is she more than women in the tent. He asked water, but she gave him milk. She brought forth cream in a lordly dish.
Yeah, which is a poetic way of saying, he asked for water, but she brought forth cream.
She put her hand to the tent peg and her right hand to the workman's hammer, and she hammered Sisera. She smote through his head. She crushed and pierced his temple. At her feet he bent, he fell, he lay down. At her feet he bent, he fell where he bowed. There he fell down bereft of life.
Yeah, which is a really poetic and, again, maybe a more rhythmic way of saying she killed him. But yeah, when you want to go back to your image of Rosie the Riveter, yes, it actually says the workman's hammer. It actually says the word workman's hammer in her right hand, right? This is a image for, it may not just workman's hammer. It sounds like for Rosie the Riveter, it sounds like a communist propaganda poster. But she has her she has her
She did have a sickle, though.
she has her tent peg. Yes, she has her hammer and she has her tent peg. Which again, it's like she has no hand. Like she used all her hands against them. And this is the like she like in that moment. How's she gonna? She has no hands to.
Right,
to
if he
defend
wakes
herself.
up and he has a knife, she's
She's
toast.
dead. She's dead. She's got tools in her hands. And again, the way it describes her falling at her feet, right?
Yeah, that's weird. He's already lying down.
Yep. Ben Ragleha. And again, that phrase at her feet is used twice. Ben Ragleha, Ben Ragleha. I mean, it's the same phrase. At her feet, he fell, at her feet, he fell. So
Well, it's more dramatic. I mean, it's
Yeah,
more
it's-
romantic.
It's more,
It's
it doesn't,
poetry.
it's poetry. If you try to picture it, it doesn't quite.
no, but
No, it doesn't work.
But here's
Right.
here's the play, right? Because you're right, it's poetic, and it's poetic because he's if he's at her feet, he's bending down, like, right, it's the image of, still use that image, right? When someone proposes marriage, they get down on their feet and they bend before the woman, right? They bend, they're showing that they're paying her homage by bending in front of her. So he's at her feet. Now, usually being at her feet has a sexual or romantic, at the very least, connotation that this is the way the guy would normally be at her feet, why he would be at her feet. But it's Nafal Shadur. He's bereft of life. He's dead at her feet. And that's the point, is that she is, and that's the last phrase. He fell down dead. So he didn't fall down in romance. He didn't fall down in love. He fell down dead. And that is that's the drama of that scene and the drama of that language, which isn't just he's dead on the ground. He's at her feet, dead, prostrate, and now dead. It's just a really powerful way of saying he killed her. She killed her. Really powerful. Now, this next scene is not in the narrative, but whoa, did this get flipped quick? Because the last thing we see is he's dead, she killed him. And then the next line.
The mother of Sisera looked out at the window and moaned through the lattice. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why are the hoofbeats of his steeds so tardy? Her wise ladies answered her. She even returned answer to herself. Have they not found booty? Have they not divided the prey, to every man a damsel or two? To Sisera a booty of diverse colors, a plunder of many-colored needlework, dyed double-worked garments for the necks of the spoilers. So let all your enemies perish, O Lord, but let them that love him be as the sun when it comes out in its might. And the land was quiet for 40 years.
That's the end of the story. So the story ends with Sisera's mother having essentially, well, she doesn't quite have the last word, because the last word is, the last word is probably not this.
Sisera's mother is fantasizing that he's late because he's gotten so much treasure.
Though the poem actually ends here, oh Lord, but I don't know why they didn't start a new line here. In the Hebrew text, it ends here. There's an ending here, and then that last clause, it's part of the same verse, but again, the chapters and verses were put in by Christian scholars later. The land was quiet 40 years is clearly not part of the song. That's not the way you end the song. You end the song with, let them that love him be as, when the sun, when it comes out with all its might. So this is about, again, what happens when you go to war against the Israelites.
Are these songs meant to be sung like a repeat song? Is that what things are replaced?
For sure, this song has repeat and has chorus, not chorus, but has repeat. It has a
Because they say one thing and then they say it again. It's like,
that's normally in poetry.
That's biblical poetry.
That's biblical poetry. What's interesting about this one is that there actually are complete repetitions of the line rather than just a synonym, rather than just saying,
yeah,
like what we normally have, which is her wise ladies answered her. She even returned an answer. Oh, that's actually two different ideas, but normally, blessed is the woman, blessed above all women is Yael. Blessed is she more than the woman in the tent. That's the normal biblical line. What's different about this story is this song, is Ben Ragleha Kara. And then here in line 27, Ben Ragleha Kara. Here it's Ben Ragleha Kara. Nafal. I mean, it's the same line. It's not a different way
It's
of
like
saying
the
it.
Psalms.
It's a song. It's like I said, we say, and you said, sing the same thing in the next line. You only do that in a song. You're only doing that when you're singing, not when you're reading a poem. Well, not usually. So that's why it's really a song. I mean, that's why it's really meant to be sung, because you have those not just biblical poetry styles, but clearly this was like, playing it and then playing it, maybe singing it in a harmony or singing it in a different way, different note, different sequence the next time. It works with your singing it, right? Because the variation is in the melody. It's not in the word. So that's why it's very likely that this was actually sung or played, with musical accompaniment. So,
That would be true of the Psalms as well, right?
Yep. And then when we see it in the Psalms, it's a pretty good, well, the Psalms actually tell us that they were sung by the singers. So the Psalms in some cases will flat out tell us that, or it'll tell us what instrument it was meant to be sung with, right? It was meant they actually were told this is all, it actually says, this is sung on the 6-string lyre. So that actually will tell us. What's so interesting about this story is again, where the women play into the story, because it actually ends with a woman and not the person you'd expect. Because like Sisera's mother is the way, first of all, now you already know that Sisera, well, you like whatever age you just assumed Sisera was, because you might have assumed that he was older. He's at least still young enough to have his mom around. And his mom is the voice of what the Canaanites were saying, which is, oh man, we're winning another battle. Those Israelites are so weak. We always take stuff from them. We go into battle against them. And what do we take this time? Oh, wow. Why is he not home yet? He's probably gathering all his stuff together. He's dead. And he got killed by a woman. So it's the words are placed in a woman's voice. And not only is she mentioned, it says her wise ladies, right? Her attendants are also answering her. So women, and then what it says, whoa, they just threw this line in here, right? To every guy, he gets a woman or two, right? Taking away women as property. That's the way the story was supposed to play out for Sisera. He was supposed to come back with a few extra women, battle captives. No, he got killed by a woman. That's the thing. This needlework, right? The women are going to needle. They're going to make nice stuff for you. These women now, you came back with garments and stuff like it. It's such a weird play on the feminine, because she doesn't have a needle. She had a tent peg and she drove it through your son's head. I mean, the whole thing is like a play on all the things that you thought were going to happen. The necks of the spoilers, I mean, it actually says the neck. It doesn't just say they're wearing clothes. Your son's neck is it's got nailed to it is amazingly graphic and powerful. And like they just threw out, like, if you really look at what happened here, they threw out these colors. Oh, look, they're going to come back. We're going to make all these beautiful cloth and we just celebrate with our pageantry. Oh yeah, your son's dead in a tent, in a dusty tent with his head nailed to the ground. That's where your son is. It's just an amazingly flip the switch on like what she's dreaming about and then what really happens. That's the flash, but that's the flip. I mean, that's why if you ever did this as a movie, you have his mom sitting there in her palace. It says she's looking through her lattice, looking through her window, right? She's looking through her palace, thinking about, oh, what's my son going to come back with this time? And then you flip back to that scene of him nailed to the ground.
Doesn't this indicate he's not married?
Kind of, right? Kind of does.
Yeah.
Kind of indicates that, it kind of gives at least that idea out there that this guy was going to be raping and plundering. Like that's what he was supposed to be doing, right? That's what he was going to come back and do. And it's
Would have
just,
done that married or not.
it's possible. It's possible. But the role of women in this song, the way it actually then gets turned into, like, you didn't have to have the mother of Sisera singing part of this song or being in this song, thinking and talking about what's going on here. Her women that are attending to her. I mean, that didn't have to be there. That was somebody laying a level of, and again, it's not like he didn't have a mom. She had a mom, whatever. But the fact that she got included in the song, that didn't have to be. Come on. That was a narrative.
But it shows the depth of his death and how important it was and how, I
Yes.
mean, it really adds
But it
great
shows
power.
you the power of whoever wrote this song, whether Deborah, Deborah did it, whatever. But it shows you a level of composition. It shows you a level of not just narrative complexity, but literally like, oh my gosh, you just went there with that. You didn't have to do that. It's the kind of thing where we go, oh my gosh, it was good. The story was, I was already paying attention. And then you hit me with that. Oh my gosh. And that's where you're like, it's almost sometimes too much, but a lot of times that's the stuff that we walk away with going, oh my, I'll never forget that story. And people never forgot this song. This song became part of the history of Israel, so much so that again, people would say, maybe it's the oldest, like somebody said, oh, this poem, we've been singing this song for years. I mean, this song, are you kidding me? This is like our oldest song. That's the amazing thing. Like somehow the possibility exists. And not the possibility, the probability exists that this is the oldest Jewish song of all time. Which would make it like the oldest song, one of the oldest songs that we can still point to anywhere in the world that's always been out there. It's always been out there.
Don't we see those pictures of women in the window a lot in the Middle East? Women looking out like Ishtar, or yeah, she's a goddess, but don't we see, this idea? It's also this passive idea of women looking out the window and also.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it's possible that it's a way of including them in a way that like you'd expect. I mean, this is kind of like the woman by the window, like that's all she does. But of course, the story just flipped it on its head because, yeah, that's what the royal women do. But the woman in the tent just took care of business and took care of your son. So this is the if you will, this is the narrative story. I mean, it's a poem, but the story inside of it is the story you're supposed to take away is that those women, you don't mess with those women. And so your takeaway is, wait a second, that lifestyle, the people who live in, and again, maybe hundreds of years later when people were Israelites, when King David is alive and there are people like, Bathsheba that are up on the, not in the, she's up on the roof, but when you're in buildings like that, that's a different lifestyle. The lifestyle of the woman in the tent who takes care of business, juxtaposed against the woman that's looking out the window, waiting whether her son's coming home with his chariot. That's a different, that's the lifestyle that the Israelites at this point are like, that ain't our lifestyle. That's the lifestyle of the city folk, the Canaanite, which again, they'll eventually take on that lifestyle, but it doesn't seem to be the lifestyle that we're supposed to be.
Is it possible that this predates the patriarchy?
It could exist at the time that it could exist at the time that there was less of a patriarchy. I'd be hard bent to say, hey, this story predates Abraham, but it predates our versions of Abraham stories. So that's almost for sure that it predates the Abraham versions of stories that we have. It's not that men don't have a role to play in the story. It's just that the men are clearly not the protagonists in the story, and it's not that they're incidental. It's just that they're they're not the people moving the story on for sure, which is why when you get to the end of the song, it's the women that are still singing. It's the women that are still there. And that is the, yeah, I mean, this is the, I mean, it ends with God. I mean, at the end, it's, you know, let them love God. I don't like the fact that they have the hymn is the H there is clearly God, but yeah, it does end with God. You know, it doesn't end with the people. It ends with God. Now, I will tell you, we did not look at the song. We did not look at the story that it inspired, the story of Judith. And I do want to give Judith a little credit before we retire from today, because Judith, the story of Judith is not in the Hebrew Bible. It is in the Apocrypha. It is in the Christian Bible. It is in the Catholic Bible. It is in the Protestant. Protestant Apocrypha. So it was kept by the church. It is a story that is completely historically not accurate, and it's all over the place. It talks about Nebuchadnezzar being the king of the Assyrians. It jumps all over the place. It has people's name in Greek. We don't have an original Hebrew version of the book of Judith. We do have the Septuagint version, which means we had it 2,000 years ago. It was almost assuredly written by a Jew. But the hero of the story, Judith, essentially she's a widow, so she's not married. She doesn't have a husband in the picture at the time, but she kills the general Holofernes, who, by the way, clearly has a Greek name, who's working for Nebuchadnezzar. When Holofernes comes to her town, she takes him alone. And in chapter 13, while she was alone in the chapter with him, while he was on his bed, fast asleep, being exceedingly drunk, there he's not drinking milk, he's drinking the old-fashioned way with a little wine. Judith spoke to her maid to stand out before the chamber and watch, and she stood before the bed praying with tears and the motion of lips and silence, saying, "Strengthen me, O Lord, God of Israel." Yeah. When she said this prayer, she went to the pillar that was at the bed's head. She took the sword, his sword that was there on it, and she drew it out, took him by the hair of his head, and said, "Strengthen me, O Lord, at this hour," which is her song. And she struck twice upon his neck and cut off his head and took off his canopy from the pillars and rolled away his headless body. And she took the head of Holofernes and gave it to her maid and bade her to put it into her wallet, which again seems to imply he had a really small head, but wallet could also be probably better translated as purse, not wallet. And then Judith tells the rest of her town, "Look what I did. I killed Holofernes, and you guys should all go up to battle and be heroes." We don't know much about like why this story exists, because we have a perfectly good story of Yael, but this idea of women continuing to inspire us to fight definitely didn't go away. The Maccabees liked the story. It was very similar to other stories in the book of Maccabees. There's traditions that Judith is related to the Maccabees, though it doesn't say that. But it became associated with Hanukkah. Why? Well, Jews didn't really read the book of Judith, as I said. They didn't read the story of Judith. But interestingly, the Christians did. And it seems like much later on, when we came into contact with Christians in places like Spain, and we knew that they were reading this story, and we knew she was Jewish, we said, "Hey, let's read this story, or a version of this story," which we did, at Hanukkah. And so we had a Jewish version of the story of Judith, which is not this version, but a similar version. And we read that story every year at Hanukkah. Now, the Shabbat of Hanukkah, we would read the story of Judith traditionally in the Jewish community. It became associated with milk, even though the story here is much more about the wine, but maybe because of the Yael story about the milk, it became associated with milk and cheese. And so we were supposed to have cheese during the time of Hanukkah. Originally, before we had latkes, we had cheese at Hanukkah. The original latke was probably more of a cheese pancake than a potato pancake. Why? Because they didn't have potatoes, folks. They didn't have potatoes because they were in the New World. They were not in Europe yet. So we didn't have potato latkes until probably the 1800s. Sorry to rain on your Hanukkah parade, but we didn't have Hanukkah latkes during the time of the Maccabees because they were only in the Americas. So by the time they got, and by the way, that meant Irish people didn't have potatoes either. So kind of weird to think about who didn't have potatoes, but none of those people in Russia or all those other people making vodka out of their potatoes, they didn't have potatoes. So it came from the New World. So that being said, potato pancakes became the next level of having fried foods. And the original pancake was probably a cheese pancake and was eaten to remember Judith, to remember Yael, to remember Jewish women who fought and who did not give up, and who hopefully inspired Jewish men to step up and do what they should do. And so the stories of Judith, the stories of we have other women heroes in the Bible. Please don't limit that to those two women. But the idea of tough women who cut off people's heads, who nail people to the ground, who are not afraid to get their heads a little dirty. Those stories of tough Jewish women, we should never forget them. So, folks,
There it is.
so the Song of Deborah, or Deborah's song. So hopefully, again, these amazing women in our history will continue to inspire us, to help us do the kind of work that we're supposed to be doing. And in some cases, it's dirty work. Hopefully, it won't be murdering work, but sometimes, again, we have to remember that even the most marginalized people, in some cases, even a woman like Yael, who had virtually no power in a society, they end up being the people who can be our heroes. So it's not just women. It's also, I would say today, those people who are oftentimes not given a voice or not given the normal avenues for power to, they end up being our heroes. So that is the story of Deborah and our great judge. So thank you to Rosemary, our great reader today, for reading and helping us study that story. And thank you to Judith, who's named after Judith, for, I don't know. Judith, do you have anything to say? Do you have anything to say to finish?
I want to thank you all for honoring my ability to pound 10 pegs.
You use the knife.
Oh, I used the sword.
All right. Well, happy Hanukkah, everybody. I gotta get on a Zoom call now. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.